Hello YouTube and welcome to another episode of the Educated Barbarian. We're going to start again in book 2 where Shoujo gives us a description of what he considers to be someone who has strayed from the path, someone who has stopped being a warrior. He studies the teachings of Buddha to detach himself from the perpetual uncertainties of life and death. He toys with arts such as poetry and other gentile pursuits, thinking all these things are praiseworthy. He desires a lifestyle of equanimity and comfort. This is acceptable for a hermit or for one who has taken holy orders and lives beyond the mundane world. It is totally inappropriate, however, for one who shoulders the burden of duty. A retainer who hopes for this is a coward. In his pursuit of a carefree existence, he is shirking the taxing responsibilities that come with practicing the way of the warrior. So, in a sense, within the context of the time period, he's expressing what someone who is checked out of society would be doing and the type of duties that they would be avoiding. And it's interesting to see that we can actually relate that to our world. So, what he says is that there are certain people that are going to try and cease to exist within the physical realm and they're going to be focused only on the spiritual realm. And that can be a focus on religion, focus on science, on being literate, which, as I explained before, is a misunderstanding of the path because you need both the spirit and the body to be strong. So, as far as the details of that type of deviancy goes, believing that arts and literature are praiseworthy by themselves, that's important. Why? Because these can be expression of the self and they can be accepted and seen just as a piece of nature to be observed and admired, and that's fine, but it cannot stop there. I think that we can all agree that the best pieces of literature, the best paintings, all inspire us and they also tell a story. There's always a story. This is why I personally feel disconnected with what we call modern art, because I don't feel anything for it. Meaning that it tends to focus too much on the visual appeal and on an ability to shock the viewer. But beyond the shock and the colors, there is nothing. And that's a big problem because it's a misunderstanding of what art is. And it's the same for theater, it's the same for literature. A good book should stay with you for the rest of your life because it's like a friend. And whenever you open it again, you rediscover a word that you left behind, and when you close it, you should feel a bit sad. These things don't exist just to be pretty. That is not doing the arts a favor to consider them to just be something like this. He desires a lifestyle of comfort. I'm going to speak from my perspective here, but I've always noticed that comfort is often sought after by people who, in that sense, express their inability to exist without it. It's fine to want to live a comfortable life, but you need to be able to also be taken outside of that comfort and be fine. If you can only sleep in your bed with your pillow and your covers at a perfect angle, you pigeonhole yourself into that situation. And now, if you are outside of it, you're not going to be able to even get a night of sleep. And that's not good. Comfort is an upgrade that we enjoy when it's there. When it's not there, life has to continue. And as he says, this is okay for religious people, but not for someone who seeks to be a warrior. One just needs to observe the actions of unlearned men devoted only to serving their masters or those who struggle to look after their families. The way they discharge their day-to-day chores throughout their lives is truly magnificent. A retainer who insists on practicing Zen, composing poetry, or collecting stylish objects and dressing in outlandish attire is wont to squander his stipend and will eventually fall to pieces. He will not resemble a layman or monk, nor a nobleman or hermit. He is just an ugly sight to behold. So Yamamoto has categories in his mind and he wants people to abide by them. I can relate to that. However, people are not so simple, but it is true in a sense that if your essence is fixated on one thing, you are going to be very good at that one thing. But you can't be everything. For example, it's tough to be an excellent dancer and singer at the same time. You need to specialize at some point. And if you refuse to do so, you might end up in the middle. You're not a singer, you're not a dancer, so you're nothing. And that's what he says here, that it's unbecoming to see someone who is supposed to be a warrior, who sort of tries to be an intellectual at the same time, but he's just an half-baked intellectual, and therefore he ends up being nothing. He resembles nothing. Some are of the opinion that men should be free to engage in cultural diversions in their spare time after completing their daily chores. In this sense, such activities will not obstruct one's work. Yet, a retainer should have no leeway to think of such things if he is fully focused on his profession. A samurai with spare time on his hands is obviously not working hard enough. You will come to realize that this is actually a truth when you get to the peak of your productivity as a man or as a woman. And that usually tends to happen in your 20s and your 30s sometimes, meaning that it is a good thing that children and teenagers and young adults have a lot of spare time. And that spare time should be spent researching who you are and trying to foresee the future, trying to build yourself a path. A lot of people don't do that. That's a big problem. If you spend the time that is allocated to your own self-development on wasting it away on social media or trying to please other people by being part of a group and being a follower, you're going to have a tough realization when you are in your 20s and you just don't even know who you are, because the time that was allocated for you doesn't exist anymore, because you've just entered the peak of productivity, and that peak of productivity entails that you shouldn't have time, meaning that the amount of moments in my life personally where I'm just standing there and thinking, wow, I have nothing to do, I can't even remember a moment like this. I always have something to do. And sometimes I can fill these moments with leisure, meaning that I rest, but it's a rest that is going to serve me because I'm going to get back to work afterwards. So it's a way to not burn out completely. But they're rare. It's not even a ratio of 1 to 10. Most of the time that I spend doing nothing is time where I sleep. And I think most adults can relate to that. And then when you have kids, it's even worse than that. And in your old age, it sort of tempers down. So as you age and as you become older and more mature and more independent, you end up reaching that peak and then it slowly goes down again. But for warriors who are supposed to be at that peak, if they can say, I have 5 hours to devote to poetry, then they're not working hard enough. They should be training instead. And a lot of people in our lives, especially if they've never trained before, one of the excuses I hear the most is, I don't have time to train. And that's a lie, because everyone has time to train. I know very few people who actually don't have time, and they're the people I described where they're already so busy that yes, they don't. But for most of the time, these people have plenty of time to spare. They just want to spend it doing something else, because training is tough. Or at least it is tough until you realize that it's not. Because once you develop a taste for hard work, you won't need it in your life. A retainer need only keep one thing in mind. He will become distracted through his fixation with reasoning or nurturing artistic talents. It will make him rather agitated. Having an artistic talent as the basis for one's service is of lower level. A samurai who is not gifted with superior acumen or cannot boast a particular artistic flair or bold nature and deems himself useless and thus resigned to dwell in the backwaters should take solace in being his lord's one and only worthy retainer. Regardless of whether his lord shows him any kindness or consideration, if he doesn't even recognize the man, he shouldn't care in the slightest. He still feels indebted to his lord day and night and serves so devotedly that it brings tears to his eyes. This is a point of view that might not be well received, and it's personally not well received by me either, meaning that when I perceive a relationship of loyalty, the loyalty needs to go both ways, and it cannot be the existence of someone who is submitted to the other person 100% and who gets nothing in return. But as far as Yamamoto goes, that's how he perceives a worthy retainer, because it's tough to be called that if your lord appreciates you and is very complimentary of you. Meaning that, of course, then it's easy to be in love with your lord and to serve him day and night. If the Lord refuses to give you praises, that's when it becomes a path that is tainted with suffering because you get no pleasure from it, and yet you do it regardless. That's what Bushido is for shoujo. And you can maybe relate that to your life. You might have situations in your life where you will be doing something out of pure love, you will get zero gratifications from it, it will even make you very unhappy, but there will be something in you that is going to push you forward. And that's the devotion that Yamamoto is describing here. This is easy to achieve. Nobody alive doesn't innately possess this capacity. Few are unaware of it, but there are really hardly any who choose to live in accordance with this ideal. It is simply a matter of attitude. If a man makes up his mind to do so, he can be a remarkable retainer. There's a logical explanation as for why people don't do that. The reason why people don't pursue things that don't give them results is because we are built as human beings to always strive for results. Because, and that's my evolutionary standpoint on that and understanding of how we got to that point today, when you do something and you get nothing in return, from a survival perspective, it's a terrible use of your time because you spent time and energy and you got zero resources. So in terms of wealth, in terms of just caloric expenditure, it's not good for the species. But we've evolved so much as animals that we now can intellectualize that, meaning that we have the ability to do something that is going to bring us nothing and still realize that we want to keep doing it. Animals are not capable of that. If you have a cat or a dog, the cat and the dog, they do things because they get something. Your cat plays because he's training to be a better hunter. Everything in their life is dictated by the instinct of a pursuit of optimization, I would say, a pursuit of never wasting a moment. And we humans don't have that. And in a sense, it's a blessing and a curse. We have free will, but a lot of people waste their life away because they have that will. This sentiment is comparable to love. The more unsympathetical a man is treated, the stronger his love becomes. When he finally sees his lover, he does not hesitate foregoing his life for him. So here, the use of him might be strange. For people who researched Japanese culture, at least back in those days, it's not practiced anymore, they had something called Shinobu Koi, which is secret love, and they had what could only be described as pederastic relationships, meaning that even though the two cultures never actually communicated with one another and the time periods are completely different, the tutelage of young men by older men and the sometimes deviant relationships that were born from it existed in Japan as well. And this is also why all of that those communications between the Lord and the retainer, all of that is sort of colored with love in these writings. And you might think it's a mistranslation. It's not. It's a perfectly well translated meaning, and that's where it comes from. And Shoujo is saying that this is love. This is what love is. Love doesn't need to be to go both ways to exist. You can be in love with someone who doesn't love you. You can love a practice or a discipline that has no love for you because you are not gifted or talented for it, and yet you love it. Being devoid of any special talents and not having had an opportunity to fight in battle, I was not a partially good servant. Nonetheless, from a young age, my feelings for my lord ran deep, and I simply made up my mind to be his one and only retainer. I was his most valiant warrior. This determination permeated right into the marrow of my bones. As such, no intelligent or competent man of the highest pedigree could make light of me. On the contrary, I have been afforded so much tender solicitude by other retainers, it is somewhat flustering. So he's explaining here, and it sort of goes from what I've just said, that from a young age he always cultivated love for his lord. And that love here is not on an interpersonal level. He's not in love with the figure of or the face of the man who is his shogun. He's in love with the status, meaning that to him it's like protecting a god. in a sense, and that's the way the system worked actually. And he explains that the strength that came from doing that can be applied to everything in your life as long as you put your mind to it. And eventually, when you put your mind to it, you become good at it, and people around you start recognizing that you're good at it. And that can be applied to anything really, even if you're really bad at something. By virtue of working enough and just grinding, you will eventually be better than people who had talent for it. Work truly is the great equalizer. The only thing is that it takes time and it takes effort. And if you are faced with someone who was talented to begin with, if they work just as hard as you, then you will never surpass them. But the very simple solution is to work harder than them. All I did was value my Lord above all else. Come what may, I was resolved in my heart to throw myself into a frenzied state, shiniguri, to die for him. Only now will I venture to admit that my single-minded faith was strong enough to shift heaven and earth, and it had been acclaimed as such by other members of the clan. Tough to know if what he says is true here, because there are testimonies of his devotion for the Lord. There are no such testimonies of his ability to showcase that in battle. So it's more of a spiritual thing here, but it was expressed before. If your spirit is strong enough and you're actually disciplined and devoted to one thing, that is going to build up over time to the point where you eventually become unstoppable in a sense. I tend to view new methods with suspicion, even if they are thought to be for the better. So, I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. I am personally like this, but I also am a little bit of a contrarian, so it's sort of a weird fight within me. When there is a thing that comes to replace something that I've known for a long time, I always see it a little bit with suspicion, but I always try and intellectualize it and think about it without being too subjective and being too attached to the past. And I think that what Shoujo does here is actually quite honest and quite good for the mind. You need to be able to recognize your bias, and a lot of people, what you could call traditionalists or conservatives, tend to be attached to things that are old by virtue of them being old, and of you being born in that tradition and you grew up with it. And realize that the opposite camp, the progressives, have the exact opposite mindset, meaning that for them, everything that is new is good. And since you know that their standpoint is bad, you should also realize that yours is bad too. You need to have an open mind. Of course, at some point, an open mind can become relativism, and that's when you become easy to convince that things that actually were good in the past are not needed anymore, and you can be manipulated that way. But try to always rediscover things within yourself and without yourself. And I think that's, especially in the realm of training, that's quite important. Because you will sometimes stick, and I've done it, I know other people have done it, it's insane to see how stubborn the human species can be. You will stick with something for years that doesn't work, and you will not accept that it doesn't work until someday it clicks and you're going to think, wow, I've wasted so much time doing it. And all of that can be solved with a little bit of an open mind attitude and a tendency to want and try things. Just try it once. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If somebody mocks the way of the warrior or criticizes the clan, tersely counter him without conviviality and put the heathen firmly in his place. Be prepared for this at all times. So, an attachment to the way that is going to push you to criticize people who don't follow the way. I think it's one of the first paragraphs where I really don't agree with Shoujo, because people who criticize the way for the most part are not on the way. They never walked that path. So they criticize something they know nothing about. And it's something across the board in the realm of YouTube fitness that I've always seen. People who are dedicated to themselves, who are dedicated to the practice of strength training, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, all of that, they will not be engaged, or they will not engage in that type of talk. They will not criticize others for their passion. They will not try and pass what they do as being the best, because deep down they are convinced that what they're doing is right. And when you are convinced that what you're doing is right, you don't need to convince other people. And you don't need to make people feel bad about what they do, because you're on your path. So those are the fellow warriors. They're already on the path. And they are the ones that would be sensitive to remarks about the path, not the guys who are not on it. You're going to completely blow your fuse at a guy that doesn't care because he doesn't get it. I think it's a deep waste of time. Instead of doing that, you could have spent your time trying to nurture and boost someone who's actually trying to get on the path. These people are much more important. These are the people you need to focus on, because negativity is going to be thrown at you in this life, but it's your job to not respond to it, because when you respond to negativity, you only feed it. If there is a way to be constructive and corrective, then it's fine, but if it's just to battle for ego, there is no point. So be careful with that. And also, mockery is subjective. I think mockery is healthy sometimes. It's good to laugh. It's good to not take yourself too seriously, because all of that talk about being a warrior and everything, it's for you. It's not for other people. You're not going to go out and say, I'm a warrior, look at me, I'm so brave. No, it's for your own soul and spirit, so that you can continue to progress forever. Other people they don't need to know you're a warrior. They will eventually be able to tell from your actions, not your words. Even though it is normal for men who excel in the arts to see others as rivals, Yodo Sachu bestowed his title of Master of Linked Verse on Yamaguchi Shoshin. This act of humility was admirable. So basically, it's a story of someone who was quite gifted in the arts and who had to decide who was the best at this one discipline, and he bestowed it on someone else. And that is indeed a remarkable act of humility. But if you're true to yourself and you are actually in the pursuit of the truth, this shouldn't come off as it's not a great price to pay. If someone is better than you, they are better than you, objectively better. And you will know people who are better than you. I've met plenty of people who are much more intelligent than me. I've met plenty of people who had better genetic potential for bodybuilding. At least, 8 out of 10 people I meet have better potential, right? They don't actually actualize this potential, but they have it. And it's always important to recognize these people, because failing to recognize them is not going to change your status and your station in life. It will, however, destroy your spirit bit by bit, because you're being a bitter, negative person. If you differentiate between public space and your private quarter, or being on the battlefield or on a tatami mat, you will not be able to respond in timely fashion as the exigency of a crisis may require. Be August held at all times. Inability to demonstrate valor even on a tatami mat in your house means that you cannot be relied on in a battle. So this is peculiar, because it can only really be applied to martial artists. And even then, I think a lot of guys who train would disagree with that, because you're not always going to be ready. It's sort of, it comes from the times, right? Because back in those days, you could actually be attacked at any moment. But someone, for example, who trains boxing right now, you're going to get attacked maybe on the streets, but not in your house. Or if it's in your house, you're going to have time to actually get ready. And for the most part, martial arts exist within parameters, meaning that when you're on the boxing ring, you know what the other guy can do, because he cannot break the rules or he loses. This doesn't exist back in the days. The guy in front of you can do whatever he wants. So that's where that comes from. What's interesting though about saying that is that I think for bodybuilding is the exact opposite. You should not move your body with the intent and just the very intention that you put in when you bodybuild. I cannot remember who said it, but basically bodybuilding and training for bodybuilding should be like being a lion, meaning that the lion just lays around all day. He doesn't run for fun. He doesn't exert his strength. He just rests. But when it's time to hunt, he hunts. Same for bodybuilding. Move your body normally throughout the day and try and focus all of your intensity when you train. And you will find that this is going to make the training special, because it's going to be a special window of time in the day, and you're going to be more effective. And I think we're going to stop here. No, there's too many here. Okay, one more. And then we'll stop at 96. 86. A word has the power to make people brace themselves if it is fitting for the equation. I remember having such experiences. Always keep this in the back of your mind and be ready to say the right thing as each situation dictates. It is terribly difficult to explain, but it ultimately depends on your heart. A man with no sentiment in his heart will never understand. Okay, I'm glad we said this one before I end this video. So this is actually quite hard to understand, but I know exactly what he means. And that, to me, is timing. And it's emotional timing, it's contextual timing, it's what is the term for that? Lyrical timing. You can say a sentence to someone within a certain context, and the same sentence with the same meaning can have a completely different impact based on the words you choose. Even if the meaning doesn't change, the form changed, and that's enough. And you will find that you will have moments in your life like this where you will say something and you will not get the response that you hoped for because you missed that timing. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you say that one thing and it's perfect. It's like in your mind you see it fits perfectly. It was the perfect block of conversation. And sometimes you can get laughs from that. You can get a group of people to laugh. You can get a group of people to accept one of your ideas. You can get an individual to find you charming, to find you scary. All of these are dependent on your word, but most importantly on the timing of the words. And this is an expression of the heart. Because I've never been able to be cerebral about it. Because you don't have time. Since it's something that happens on the go and you discuss with someone, when you talk with someone, you cannot craft the perfect answer that's going to fit. Because that would require being able to see into the future. And you're not going to just tell the person stop and then take a piece of paper and write and be like, I got it. Because it kills the timing. So it's something that comes from within. And usually when you're true, you cannot manipulate people with this. It's not a strategy of manipulation because that sentence is going to come out of your mouth before you can even stop it because it comes from the heart. It's what your heart wants to say, not your brain. And that usually is a strike. It's either a strike in a positive or a negative way. So I'm going to leave you with that. We're advancing in the Hagakure. And I'm having a good time because I'm actually rereading the book with you, so it's great. I'm preparing the Stoicism books as well, and I hope you are too, and you're preparing the first reading. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.